Okay, maybe I can hold my phone stable enough to do this. Let's see. So this week, focusing on racial battle fatigue in faculty, a series of autoethnographic, I don't want to say essays, but texts that it's edited by Hartlip and Ball. And the introduction, the preface, focuses on a communal fear of speaking truth to power, that in higher ed institutions, the doctoral degree does not necessarily offer a protective barrier in terms of class, and that the main themes throughout the work are going to be hiring experiences, white epistemology, and alternative ways of knowing and being, senses of not belonging, and experiencing microaggressions, as well as invisibility. And so as I go through part 1, part 2, and part 3, I'm going to go through each author and then attempt to circle back to those main themes that are laid out at the beginning. So in Ford's piece, the main idea was the double consciousness, going back to Du Bois and this idea of constantly being aware of that people are thinking that you are Black first and a person second. And my takeaway from this was not just that grammar is political and an avenue to be policed, but being invisible is one of the ways that it's not just psychologically damaging, but it affects one's physiology as well. Then Palmer's, I'm going to try to go kind of fast because there's so many authors of this, that this is the piece that CRT tenets are in action, and they go through the main tenets of CRT. My main takeaway with this one was one of the actionable approaches. So the faculty cluster hiring I thought was super interesting. So instead of predominantly white institutions kind of reverting to tokenism, that hiring faculty members within this cluster of faculty members that have either worked together in the past, that have written together, but that have a foundational understanding of CRT, and that you're hiring a community of individuals that are going to advocate for the campus community as opposed to relying on one individual or reverting to that tokenism. Hayes' piece, exploring that it was a rare occasion that the faculty were predominantly of POC as the majority. However, they were also guilty of upholding whiteness. And on page 50, there was a specific quote that I wanted to think about. It is only through explicit, aggressive, intentional, and very color-conscious efforts of all of us to change the way things are done. So not reverting to upholding whiteness or reverting to not wanting to make waves or kind of the protection of the self. So these main points in part 1, there goes back to the beginning of having this fear of speaking truth to power, but like all of these texts, the autoethnographic approach allows for truth to be spoken in a way that is not held to the reproduction of whiteness that is like APA format, or the standardized approaches of text, that it's personal, that it's your truth, that it's your voice, and it's not being watered down or erased. Part 2, we're focusing on Asian men with Cho and men. And this is looking at Tacoma Community College, which I thought was really interesting because that is the city in which I did my undergraduate education. I went to the University of Puget Sound, so TCC is just kind of around the corner. And they have, what I thought was cool was a dialogue, building off of one another in a way that it was almost a weaving as opposed to kind of a back and forth. It was really well done. And this idea, they're not just weaving kind of their dialogue, but also weaving this idea of this building of a climate and culture of a campus with, they start and end with the piece that was in the campus newspaper, but what was really important were these microaggressions that were kind of led to this explosion of the article, and that also kind of confronting the idea that one person's experience isn't the experience for everyone as well. And then next is Chikatour's piece, and beginning with the question that a student asked them: how can I work at a historically predominantly white institution and teach about identity and privilege and power as a person of color? And one of the avenues that she seeks to deconstruct that is a public blog. And she says on page 73, in speaking up about racism, we became the problem rather than racism being the problem. And so the backlash that is faced as a result of bringing to light these microaggressions is that they become the issue as opposed to the issue is the issue. Sato, a critical autoethnography, so building both the idea of the autoethnography and in tandem with Sato's using Asian crit, but a number of, I'm thinking about how it could be applied in other ways, and so lots of other forms of CRT could also be applied here, but I really like how the autoethnography is used in tandem with theory. And I think the main takeaway with this piece is that while they were serving on the committee, looking at equity, inclusion, and diversity, that the structural concerns were never addressed. Just the symptoms of the structural concerns were merely played around with, as opposed to true changes were made. The tactics that she discusses are being ignored, pacified, and deflected. And this was a huge point, kind of one of the biggest takeaways for me through the whole text so far is rules were written by those in power, white, and thus only serve white people. So when we're thinking about changing or editing rules, they have to be written by everyone, not just those who think that they hold power, white people. Then in part 3, we get into kind of Latinx identities, and Boveda argues that all minority-serving institutions are connected to the larger history of westernized universities that then devalue Black, Indigenous, and feminist onto epistemologies. And in their piece, the institution, the MSI, fails to unpack the nuances of the experiences of what they just kind of lump into these broad categories, like just Latinx or just Asian American or just Black, and fail to kind of look at all of the complexities within each particular identity or identities, and that there can be intersectionality within all identities. Then Martinez Carrillo, my main takeaway with this one was that mentorship can serve to be such a space of healing and growth, but only when that mentor is informed by CRT and acknowledges their particular privileges and power, and also acknowledges the mentee's truth in their experience. So I think what I'm looking forward to for part 4 and 5 is bringing even more connections to these ideas about speaking up, because one commonality in all of the actionable steps in the essays were speaking up about the injustices and the microaggressions that you experience and that you witness. And I think one of my biggest questions is, can we do that? And by we, I mean white female teachers. And I know that I can use my privilege in different ways to change rules and systems like I'm doing at East, but within higher ed, it is different in that there are different boards and committees, and what we've seen throughout all of these pieces is that the bureaucracy is so layered, and that's part of the reason why it becomes so complex when you do speak up about something, is that you can cut one piece of the web, but it's still this giant web. Yeah.